If you want massive shoulders naturally, is overhead press even necessary? Well, that depends on your goals, programming, and individual weaknesses. But what I will say is that most lifters probably should do a vertical press of some kind. I don't care which variation it is. Pick your favorite, get stronger in the long run. Because not embracing the most specific motion that directly targets that boulder factor while also having triceps and stimulus to fatigue ratio benefits is, in my opinion, a missed opportunity. So let's dive into it. First, if you're someone who does not do any lateral raises, or in general, you have plateaued, your strength has slowed down, perhaps you are stuck in the classic range that maybe 80-90% you will eventually end up with, which is 25-35 pounds on the dumbbell version. You try getting stronger, it's super slow progress. Maybe you're increasing sets here and there, couple reps added with high repetitions, but it's nothing significant. You have stalled and you've been there for a long time. Well, you can try to optimize your exercise selection as much as possible and, keep trusting the process in the long term. I'm sure that those lateral raises will pay off. No doubt about it. When you get to the 40s, your delts will be significantly bigger. But what if at the same time, there's a lot of room for improvement on your overhead press? Which is what I see in most lifters. What if you haven't hit the advanced or elite status according to traditional strength charts? Isn't that going to be a great investment compared to trying to get 5 pounds added on a lateral raise? Of course, you can still do both. That is the optimal scenario. But what I want to point out is that nobody who gets strong at the overhead press is going to have small delts. It does not happen in the real world. And you know what? Even biomechanics gurus are coming around and saying they were wrong. Why? Because for a long time, there was this prevailing myth that the overhead press did not recruit the side delts. Should have trusted the old school greats, but I digress. The fact is, we had many exclaiming, if you just do plenty of horizontal pressing, so flat bench, whether it be with barbells or dumbbells, incline benching, weighted dips, all your presses that are not vertical or anything close to it, your front delts will grow enough. There is tremendous overlap. They are getting demolished. And to that, I 100% agree on. You don't even need to isolate them with front raises or worry about the front delts at all if you're just getting stronger at the basic compounds. But what they then falsely concluded was that including the overhead press would then be redundant because it only works the front delts. And that's where they screwed up. The evidence does not support this position. The truth is, the side delts do have good leverage to perform shoulder abduction. This has been demonstrated in more than one study by this point. Now, it's obviously not equal, but the side delt stimulation is only slightly less than the front delts in the frontal and sagittal plane, meaning the overhead press is bulletproof. So what you're trying to visually build is absolutely being worked. It's just the rear where you're going to do your rows and other motions, but we're not doing presses for that to begin with, so who cares? And anecdotally, we can look around and see that there are many who took this path and still got great gains. In fact, if we look at natural bodybuilder Jeff Alberts, whose shoulders plateaued for a long time, he corrected it, not by doing more lateral raises, even though he was always doing them, but by introducing the one-arm shoulder press, because it was a movement that allowed him to get stronger, get more progressive overload in. Steve Shaw, one of the biggest proponents of overhead pressing for years and years. He certainly inspired me, saying the same message.
All I've ever really done is overhead pressing. Seated, barbell, and dumbbell have been 90% of my work. And I will tell you, my side delts are one of my strongest body parts, and I didn't come from the womb with awesome genetics. They played an integral role in that development.
You can only go so far with these little motions. And it's undeniable at this point that your side delts get recruited when you overhead press. So what I'm saying is, going back to the original point, it's not that overhead pressing is superior to lateral raises. Not at all. But it'd be wise to include them. And therefore, there's no redundancy with this initial argument, which means those who stopped doing overhead press and plateaued on lateral raises are getting worse results. And if they never did lateral raises, they assume that the other presses are enough. Well, you already screwed up on that. I don't think anyone was suggesting this was the way to go. Makes sense, and that's why I have good shoulders despite only doing lateral raises recently. And I don't want anyone to tell me that, oh, you look like that because you gained muscle during this small cut so far. Really? You don't think it's a fact that I worked up to doing 3 sets of 10 with 185 while having reps in reserve? Or doing 3 sets of 6 with 200 pounds or a 242 seated OHB? You don't think that's what helped my delts grow? Put 2 and 2 together. I'm the proof. The history is the proof. And now, data is starting to support this position. So, if you care, you're going to OHB. It's as simple as that. So yeah, I knew I wasn't crazy. The masses were just unable to critically examine all the facets that go into overall programming and the OHB. Which leads me on to my next point. Even though overhead pressing is godly, you don't need a lot of it in order to blow up your shoulders. So that's the great news in all of this. Don't think for a second that I'm telling you to become a strongman competitor. They are the only athletes among maybe Olympic weightlifters who require more frequency and volume for the vertical press. You can get away with 2 to 4 sets a week, yes, a week of overhead press, and you'll be perfectly fine. You don't need more than that. Allocate that volume towards horizontal pressing. So if you're running an upper lower, that could literally be 2 sets of overhead press at the end of your workout. Done twice a week, different variations. So Monday, you do the dumbbell version. Thursday, barbell. You can alternate between seated and standing. Little degrees of angles as well. Pausing, touch and go, you name it. Or you can reduce it even further, maybe hit 3 sets of 10 once a week, which is exactly how I trained last year. See, normally I do 6 sets a week, but because I wasn't trying to specialize in the overhead press, I cut that volume in half. Didn't have any expectations, but to my surprise, the gains were just as smooth. Didn't notice much differences in terms of progression. I got really strong, and recovery was arguably better. So this is something the minimalists were correct about. The overhead press can be used with a low volume, high intensity approach. Absolutely, considering our net pressing volume is on point. So we're getting that high stimulus for the entire shoulders, but if you need a bit more volume, that's where it makes sense to do more on lateral raises. So I would actually say you can do 3 sets a week of overhead press and 6 sets a week of lateral raises. That's probably a great investment. But don't do 0 is all I'm trying to say. Because another insane benefit of vertical pressing is the stimulus to fatigue ratio. It is beautiful. Everything you can ever ask for getting more out of less weight. The fact is, it's a brutal, strict exercise that doesn't give you the best leverages. It is not uncommon to have a 315 bench and less than 200 OHB. So there can quite literally be a 100-pound gap between the two. Yet, your shoulders and triceps are being comparatively stimulated. The only thing that's being taken out is the chest. And so let's say you can do 185 on the overhead press, which is respectable and totally doable. Please elevate your standards. You had 70% of that. That's only 130 pounds. You'll be doing 3 sets of 10 with 130. Whereas if you bench 315, 70% of that is 220. You see the difference? Similar triceps and delt stimulation with 90 pounds less. You don't think that's not gonna make you feel way better, especially if there's a big gap between the two? Especially if you're torso dominant, which in my experience and observations is the majority. Like, you'll barely have to warm up. And if you're sticking to traditional hypertrophy rep ranges like 3 sets of 8 to 12, do you realize that you can literally acquire bolder shoulders without even touching 185? You can be way below that amount, between 135 and 165 tops. Like, you're going to look amazing. Use strict form. Control that negative. Stop leaning back so much. If anything, use a bench for additional stability. Maximize your force production. Keep everything locked in. Even when you're trying to go heavy, you still won't. Therefore, your fatigue is always kept at a minimum. So not only are you getting a great stimulus in with a low volume approach, but it just doesn't hurt your programming in a negative way. It's not like a conventional deadlift that generates all kinds of systemic fatigue. You feel fine after overhead pressing. The same goes for deficit handstand push-ups. You're using your own body weight, but the full range of motion and difficulty allows you to just trash the whole shoulder complex and your tris. So it's easy volume. And that's why I'm not understanding, especially if you have this strength discrepancy, if you can close off the ratios, your general strength will be that much higher. Those who say otherwise are benching with a very specific powerlifting technique. Ultra wide grip, maximally arch. It's not your average lifter. If you're a thumb away distance from the smooth, you're doing a full range of motion bench, stronger shoulders and triceps are to your benefit. And that's precisely what it was for me. To the point where in 2021, I favored the overhead press over the incline bench press. My delts were such a weakness that's why I didn't have my 405 bench. Of course, this depends on the lifter. You got to know your body. And now I don't need that level of specificity. I corrected my vertical pressing strength. But if it's glaring, if it's in your face, anyone with two functioning eyeballs can see, like, yeah, you're kind of a bench specialist. Start doing that OHB. I stand by this. I've been saying this for years. I'm one of the few guys who continues to spread this message, but I genuinely believe it is the truth. Don't listen to these guys who only suggest flat incline, decline, and then hitting isolation work. No, hit the tried and true vertical press. And I promise your shoulders will be way better off in the long run. And one more thing, the overhead press is great for overhead mobility. And this is why guys like natural hypertrophy still include it at least once a week. Like I said earlier, it doesn't take much. So with that said, even though vertical pressing is technically not necessary, in my opinion, it is the way to go for most people trying to maximize their shoulder development. Given the numerous benefits, to me, it's the most obvious choice. That's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Now I want to hear your feedback. Do you agree with my takes? Did you get better gains without doing any overhead press? Let me know, and I'll talk to you all next time.